Chapter 1. Being born and raised in Norway, where frivolities are frowned on, Corey, my husband, was not one for open displays of emotion. His celebrations were low-key. He didn't accentuate the positive or minimize the negative. He just traveled the middle road, avoiding the potholes. Generally speaking, he was not inclined toward mental upsets and viewed them with suspicion, even if they were diagnosed as such by the family physician. I, on the other hand, was not born in Norway. When I was perplexed about the vicissitudes of life, I often turned to more sympathetic ears than my faithful husband. For example, to my younger sister Dorothy, who also was not born in Norway, or to my neighbor, and sometimes to the Fuller Brush man. This philosophical old gentleman often took his coffee break on the back steps of our big old 8-room house on Holgate Street. He didn't resent that I was not in the market for his wares. He'd simply settle his bones, as he described the procedure. As he poured out steaming liquid from his thermos, I poured out my soul, beginning with my childhood in Seattle. Strict father, easygoing mother, 2 sisters, difficulties in school, athletic involvement, musical activities, and of my more recent history, about the day I had come to believe that God loved me. This in itself should have been insurance against mental upsets, you'd think. Like the good ladies of the prayer circle said, just give your troubles to the Lord. I did that, but too often, like the good ladies at church, I took them all back again. One thing I had never told my willing listener about was the tragic loss that had prompted my spiritual search. I figured that no man understands that kind of sorrow. I had, however, told him details of my operation that followed months of struggling with a medical condition that had puzzled doctors despite numerous tests and x-rays, and of the prognosis, uncertainty as to its cause and to its recurrence. It was after this that the prohibition on upsets was pronounced. Try to keep yourself from mental upsets. My complaint: I can have a mental upset by just trying not to have one. My patient listener often made gestures with one of his brushes that he kept in hand to point out a truth, or to point out the ladders, ladder jacks, scaffolding ropes, toolboxes, grouting tools, tarps, and miscellaneous items that filled the basement, cluttered the area near the garage, and stretched on from sea to shining sea. I expected him to point out that herein could be one cause of my mental upsets, but he, being male, obviously felt more qualified to analyze men's needs than women's. What your husband needs is a warehouse. He calls the garage his warehouse. Then why isn't all this stuff in the garage? Because the garage is chock-a-block with power saws, sanders, jointers, drill presses. Why all the machinery? It's for repairing war surplus skis, and in case you want to know, the skis, 100 million of them more or less, are in the attic. What in the world? I'll tell you that story someday when I'm not inclined toward mental upsets. The brush salesman laughed and picked up his thermos. Well, all I can say is he needs a warehouse. I'd been telling Corey that for 10 years, from the time we moved from Seattle to Portland at the end of World War II. But it was like talking to a dead fish. He contended that in Norway, folks ran their business from their home. And I had long ago learned that how things are done in Norway was the proper way to run the world. And he had the International Sons of Norway, and the Vikings who had discovered America in the 10th century, not Columbus in 1492, to back him up. Corey's father was a good example, although he himself was not Norwegian. He had immigrated to Norway from Sweden after having graduated from Sweden's leading horticultural college. He raised flowers in greenhouses behind his home, and in the pig house, he raised, what else? Pigs. Corey's mother arranged flowers. But what with her avowed hatred of pigs, I always suspected her of having mental upsets too, even though she was born in Norway. My Irish attorney father, himself not immune from upsets, my sisters and I called them fits, whose middle name was Neat, never tired of pointing out to Corey the advantages of organization. Corey was as immune to organization as he was to mental upsets. But being respectful of his elders, he considered the source. Papa was the old block off of which I was the chip, so Corey just went along like a duck, unmindful of the rain. Corey's business had sprung into being inadvertently because of his association with a young photographer, Ray Atkinson. During the 1920s, Corey and a group of old country Norwegians pioneered skiing on Mount Hood. In 1928, they formed the Cascade Ski Club, built a clubhouse, and a regulation ski jump. This young fellow with a camera was there almost every weekend, shooting winter scenes. Because Corey had beautiful skiing form and was a top competitor in regional and national competition, he was often the focus of Ray's camera. These pictures began to appear in the rotogravure section of the Portland Oregonian. Everyone in Oregon treasured the rotogravure, including building superintendents who were always on the lookout for someone to hang a scaffold. It was a natural. The photographer became world-renowned, Corey became a waterproofing contractor, and I became a helpmate to a troubleshooter. I should have become accustomed to Corey's high-wire antics. After all, I had spent most of our courtship watching him leap from the big ski jumps. Surprisingly, that hadn't prepared me for watching him breezing merrily along the cornice of some skyscraper. It was during a break in the rain one day that Corey himself finally came up with a solution. To the storage problem, that is. We weren't actually looking for solutions. We were in the old work truck on the way home from Salem, where Corey had been inspecting the exterior walls of the Oregon State Capitol. Corey had chosen to drive the back roads instead of the freeway. He usually did this for me as kind of a bonus. After all, I didn't get out much, not compared to my former life as an entertainer in the glittering nightclub world. Now I spent my days caring for 3 children, cleaning house, washing, ironing, cooking, teaching piano, writing stories for youth magazines, and in my spare time answering the phone, which usually barked out something like, "We're waiting for Corey to swing the scaffold on the blankety-blank building. Where the blankety-blank is he?" Corey's inspection trips were usually reserved for dark, miserable days when the work had shut down. On this day, Eric, our youngest, was stretched out across my lap, his head cushioned on Norman Vincent Peale's bestseller, The Power of Positive Thinking. I had hoped for a few minutes of enlightenment, but rather than disturb our little bundle of energy, I figured that I'd enjoy the quiet while I could. Well, it wasn't exactly quiet, what with all the rattles and squeaks of the old truck. And it wasn't comfortable either. A draft was coming in the back window, which had been knocked out by a workman tying on equipment, and had been covered temporarily with plastic sheeting, and a trickle of water was running down through the heater vent. From reading Norman Vincent Peale, I had come to realize I couldn't blame all my problems on Corey's genetic deficiencies. Some things about my life I had never been able to face up to, like driving up in front of the new Heathman Hotel, where I played club dates, in our spattered 1939 black Chevrolet sedan, which before Corey's venture into the waterproofing business had been a respectable family car, stepping out in my evening gown and directing the doorman to lift the accordion out of the battered trunk. No, I had to park in the back alley and stagger around the block with my 27-pound instrument. As I looked back, that's when I adopted evening gowns and wild prints to conceal the smudges of caulking compound. Yes, I needed Peale. On that day, I had found a distraction in the windshield wiper that arched back and forth like a conductor's baton. I was humming to the rhythm, practicing my positive thinking, when suddenly Corey switched off the wiper and pulled off the road. The sun peeked through the clouds, lighting up the lovely green countryside. In a rare moment of euphoria, he uttered, "Ja, it's just like Norway." This Norwegian word ja, meaning yes, was pronounced almost like the English ja, but often uttered while breathing in instead of out. It preceded almost all of Corey's comments. "Yeah, I'll bet if we had a house right here on, say, 5 acres, we'd have a beautiful view of Mount Hood." In that moment, I began positively thinking.